Hi, my name is Robyn Priebe. I'm one of the dietitians at Green Mountain at Fox Run, which is an all-women's health and fitness retreat in Ludlow, Vermont. And one of the things that we tend to teach our participants of our program here at Green Mountain is how to put together more balanced meals. And particularly breakfast, I find a lot of people will come to Green Mountain feeling like they're putting together a pretty healthy breakfast, but it doesn't stick with them very long. And part of the problem is people may sometimes skip some of the major nutrients. So maybe avoiding carbohydrate or not getting enough fat in their breakfast, maybe not having enough protein, or sometimes we're skipping foods that are a good source of fiber or fluid, which are kind of bulky and stretch our stomach. So we wanted to look at a few examples of how to think about putting together a balanced breakfast. And not that there's any particular right way to create a balanced breakfast, but what we tend to suggest that people start with is selecting 2 to maybe 3 foods that are good sources of carbohydrate, and then making sure to pair that up with at least 1 or possibly 2 foods that have protein or fat. Now there's no guarantee that that's going to be perfect for everyone out there, but that's where we start, and then we assess how we feel. Does it fill you up? Does it carry you to lunch? If not, then we're going to make some modifications. And in terms of foods that are good sources of carbohydrate, typically people think of starches, which show up frequently at breakfast, whether it might be something like a muffin or cold cereals, hot cereal, things like pancakes, waffles, French toast. There's a lot of starchy foods available at breakfast. Bagels, English muffins. So we may pick from the starch category, breads, toast. So that could be a source of carbohydrate. Also, your fruits are a great source of carbohydrate as well. They're not a starch, but they're a sugar source, which is carbohydrate. And so whether it's cut fruit or whole fruit, a single piece of fruit would be a serving of carbohydrate. So we might pick 1 or 2 2 or 3 foods that are decent sources of carbohydrate. Now there's another food group that does contain carbohydrate, but also will have protein and possibly fat, and that would be your dairy. Things like yogurt. So in particular, this is Greek yogurt, which tends to be a little bit lighter in carbohydrate, but it does have some carb. Great source of protein. Depending on the type of yogurt that you pick, it could or it may not have fat. Milk or milk substitutes. If you're using a milk substitute, soy milk does have protein, but things like rice milk, oat milk, almond milk, coconut milk, which are all pretty popular lately, definitely have carbohydrate, but they really don't have the same amount of protein that cow's milk has. So soy milk is pretty close to the same protein content as cow's milk. So I could have one food that covers a couple nutrients. Having a glass of milk, it could have carb, protein, it could have fat in there too. Now looking at foods that tend to be a good source of protein, a lot of your protein foods tend to have fat at the same time. So we may have something like a breakfast meat. This actually happens to be a vegetarian breakfast sausage. Or things like eggs are great for both protein and fat. Cottage cheese, although it's a dairy product, does not really have much lactose left in it, and that's milk sugar, that's carbohydrate. So cottage cheese really is a good source of protein, but not high in carb. And it could or it may not have fat, depending on the variety that you pick. If we are selecting foods for protein that don't have any fat, usually a lot of your carbohydrate-based foods don't have fat in them, so you'd want to have an additional source of fat added. If I was having, let's say, fat-free yogurt, it probably makes some sense to add some fat in terms of, let's say, seeds like sunflower or pumpkin. Also nuts or flaxseed, something like that could be a great addition to add some healthy fat to your breakfast. And then certainly there are combinations of food that could provide carb, protein, fat, fiber and fluid all in one. Something like a smoothie made with dairy products and fruit and maybe nut butters could cover all bases. It may not be enough food by itself, but it certainly has a lot of different nutrients in it. We'll also serve things like frittata or bean and cheese enchilada for breakfast, so it doesn't have to be your typical breakfast foods as well. That could still serve the purpose of helping us create a balanced meal that hopefully sticks with us long term and helps us to feel satisfied.